He was hauling stones into a hole in the ground. This was the first thing the people of Hemlock's Notch knew for certain about the boy, Elias. He was 17, an orphan who had appeared that spring with a deed to the worst parcel of land in the county, a steep, rocky hillside, good for little more than goats and regret. Instead of felling the sparse timber to build a cabin on the one flat patch of ground, he was doing the opposite. He was taking things from the world and putting them into the earth. He dragged field stones on a crude sledge, one by one, from the lower meadow up the winding path to the mouth of a three-chambered cave system riddling the granite face of the hill. The townsfolk riding past on the lower road would stop and watch. It was a strange and pointless kind of labor. Everyone knew you built with wood, you built a square house with a strong roof to shed the snow. You did not crawl into the cold, damp dark and call it home. The mockery started in whispers at the general store. It grew into chuckles at the Sunday gathering. By midsummer, it was open laughter. They called him the Cave Boy. They called him Hill Dweller and Stone-Headed Elias. The name that stuck the most was Thorne's Folly, though the folly was all the boys. Marcus Thorne was the man who gave the name its weight. He was a man built like the barns he raised, broad, solid, and utterly confident in his own framework. He had built nearly every significant structure in the valley, from the church steeple to the new grist mill. His word on matters of construction was law. "The boy is building his own tomb," Thorne declared one afternoon, leaning against a barrel outside the mercantile, his voice carrying easily to the half-dozen farmers gathered there. He gestured vaguely toward the hillside with his thumb. "That hill weeps water in the spring. Come winter, that damp will turn to a killing frost on the walls. He'll be encased in ice before the new year." He shook his head, a gesture of both pity and disgust. "No insulation, no proper ventilation for a fire. He'll either freeze in the dark or choke on his own smoke. It's a fool's errand." The men nodded. Of course it was. Marcus Thorne had said so. His judgment was as reliable as the sunrise. The boy was a strange sort, quiet and intense, with eyes that seemed to look right through you. He had inherited the land from a grandfather he'd never met, a man who had been just as strange, they recalled, a recluse who had left the valley decades ago. The inherited strangeness, they concluded, was now bearing its unfortunate fruit on the hillside. So they watched the boy's pointless labor, and they laughed, secure in their knowledge of the right way to build, the right way to live. They knew all about the harshness of the coming winter. They knew how the wind came down that valley like a freight train. They knew how the snow could fall for days until the world was buried and silent. They knew what it took to survive, and they knew the boy in the cave did not. Elias heard the laughter drift up from the road on the wind. He heard the names they called him. He felt their judgment like a physical weight, but it was a weight he was used to carrying. It did not slow his work. He was not building from foolishness. He was building from a book. It was his grandfather's journal, its leather cover cracked and its pages filled with a spidery script and detailed drawings. His grandfather had come from a land of high, cold mountains, a place where the winters were not just a season, but a predator. In that place, people did not fight the earth. They partnered with it. The journal did not speak of insulation in terms of keeping cold out. It spoke of thermal mass. It spoke of trapping the earth's own heat. "The earth remembers warmth," his grandfather had written. "Deep down, below the frost line, the ground holds the memory of summer. It never falls below 54 degrees. This is your foundation. This is your furnace. Do not build upon the cold ground. Build within the warm." Elias followed the instructions to the letter. He was not building his home against the cave walls. He was building a smaller three-room structure inside the cave's 3 natural chambers. He laid a floor of thick, flat stones, but beneath them he first put a layer of dry sand and gravel for drainage, exactly as the journal described. His interior walls were rising now, made of the field stones he hauled. They were being built a full 18 inches away from the damp granite of the cave itself. This was the most crucial part. The air in that gap, the journal explained, would be warmed by the constant temperature of the deep rock behind it. That captured, stable air would become his insulation. The 3 chambers had a purpose. The outermost chamber, the largest, would be the airlock, the transition. He called it the winter room. It would house his firewood, his tools, and a place to cure meats. Its temperature would be cold, but never as cold as the world outside. The second middle chamber was the heart room. Here, he was constructing a small, efficient stone hearth and chimney. This would be the living space, the place of warmth and cooking. The chimney itself was a marvel of his grandfather's design, a double flue system where the outer flue drew in fresh air, warming it against the inner smoke flue before it ever entered the room. It was designed to breathe without creating a draft. The final deepest chamber was the smallest, the sleeping room. It had no direct heat source. It would be warmed only by the heat flowing from the heart room and the steady radiant energy of the rock all around it. It would be cool, silent, and dark, the perfect place for rest. But the labor was immense. His hands, soft at the start of spring, were now calloused and permanently stained with dirt. They bled freely when he misplaced a stone. He mixed clay, sand, and straw with his bare feet in a shallow pit, the thick mud squelching between his toes. This daub would seal the gaps in his stone walls, making them airtight. He worked from the first light of dawn until he could no longer see his hands in the growing dark of the cave. He was utterly alone in his task. Then he was not. A dog appeared one evening, a shepherd mix with ribs showing and one ear torn. It watched him from the tree line, wary and silent. Elias said nothing. He simply left a piece of his salted pork on a rock and went back to his work. The next morning, the pork was gone. The dog was closer. This continued for a week. Finally, the dog followed him into the cave, its claws clicking nervously on the stone. It lay down near the entrance of the heart room and watched him work. Elias named him Echo. The dog became his shadow, his only companion. Echo's quiet presence filled a space Elias hadn't known was empty. The silence of the cave was no longer a lonely one. It was a shared silence. By late summer, the inner walls were complete. Elias had begun work on the roof, a simple wooden frame that would not touch the cave ceiling, preserving the vital air gap. He was felling the few straight pines on his property when he heard the horses. Marcus Thorne had come to visit. He was not alone. The town's reeve and the blacksmith were with him, a delegation of practical men come to inspect the folly. They dismounted and stood with their hands on their hips, their faces masks of condescending curiosity. Thorne strode into the cave's mouth without asking permission. He stopped in the winter room, his eyes taking in the careful stonework. He ran a hand along the granite wall of the cave. It was cool and slick with moisture. "This is what I told you," he said, not to Elias, but to the men behind him. "Damp. The place reeks of it." He stepped through the stone doorway into the heart room. He stared at the intricate chimney design, the half-finished interior walls, the air gap he could now clearly see. He kicked one of the stones of the inner wall with his boot. It did not move. The construction was solid. This seemed to irritate him more. "All this work," Thorne said, turning to face Elias, "all this sweat for a wet grave. Son, I build houses for a living. I know what stands and what falls in these mountains. This will fall." "It will stand," Elias said quietly. His voice was hoarse from disuse. Thorne scoffed. "On what authority do you make that claim? A dream? A feeling in your gut?" "I have 30 years of experience. This design violates every principle of sound construction. The stone will draw the cold in, not keep it out. There's no proper foundation. A rock slide from above, and this whole ceiling could come down." "The foundation is the entire mountain," Elias replied, his gaze steady. "And the ceiling has been here for 10,000 years. It will be here for 10,000 more." The reeve chuckled. The blacksmith shook his head. Thorne's face hardened. He saw not confidence, but defiance. He saw a boy's foolish pride. "I will make you an offer," Thorne said, his tone shifting. "One time only. This land is worthless, but the timber has some value. I'll give you $20 for the deed. That's more than fair. You can come to town, work for me. I'll give you a room in my barn, and I will teach you how to build a proper house, a house that will not kill you." It was, in its way, a kindness. It was an offer of salvation. It was also a dismissal of everything Elias had spent months building. "Thank you," Elias said, "but I am building a proper house. My house." The refusal hung in the cool, damp air. Thorne's jaw tightened. He had offered the boy a way out, and the boy had thrown it back in his face. "Have it your way," Thorne said, his voice cold. "But when the first blizzard hits and you're freezing in this hole you've dug, do not come to my door seeking warmth. You have made your choice." He turned and strode out of the cave, the other men following in his wake. Elias watched them go. He felt a pang of doubt, a flicker of fear. These were experienced men. What if they were right? He looked at his grandfather's journal, lying open on a flat stone. He looked at the solid walls he had built with his own hands. Echo came and nudged his hand with a wet nose. The doubt passed. He picked up his tools and went back to work. A few weeks later, another visitor arrived. It was Lena, the blacksmith's daughter. She came with a sharpened adze he had ordered, its edge keen and oiled. She was younger than him, maybe 15, with curious eyes that held none of the town's mockery. She handed him the tool and looked around the winter room. "My father says you're wasting your time," she said, her voice soft. "He says the damp will get in your bones." "Your father is a good blacksmith," Elias said. "He is not a stonemason." She stepped further inside, her gaze taking in the 3 distinct doorways leading to the 3 chambers. "Why 3 rooms?" she asked. "Why not just one big one?" It was the first honest question anyone had asked him. He found himself wanting to answer it. He explained the principle of heat zoning. He described how the outer room would blunt the worst of the cold, how the middle room would hold the fire, and how the inner room would stay warm from the earth and the captured heat. "Each room helps the one next to it," he finished. "They work together." She nodded slowly, considering it. "It makes a kind of sense," she said, "like the layers of clothes we wear in winter." He smiled, a rare thing. "Exactly." She did not stay long, but her visit was like a splinter of light in the gloom. Not everyone thought him a fool. One other person took notice. Old Man Hemlock, the town's namesake's great-grandson, was a relic from another time. He no longer worked, but he watched. He watched the sky. He watched the animals. He saw the geese flying south in a great panicked wave in early September. He saw the squirrels gathering pine cones with a frantic energy he had not seen in his 80 years. He saw the woolly bear caterpillars that fall, and he noted that their fuzzy bodies were almost entirely black, the traditional orange band of mild weather a mere sliver. He stood in the general store, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "A white winter is coming," he announced to anyone who would listen. "A winter that eats houses. The earth is preparing. We are not." They smiled and patted his frail shoulder. Poor old Hemlock. His mind was going. The first test came in October. A cold snap descended on the valley with shocking speed. The temperature plummeted to 10 degrees overnight, a hard, killing frost that blackened the last of the garden vegetables. The townsfolk grumbled, lit their fires early, and burned through their woodpiles at an alarming rate. In his cave, Elias lit the first fire in his new hearth. He had finished the chimney just days before. The draw was perfect. Smoke rose in a clean, straight line. The small fire of seasoned oak crackled merrily. The effect was immediate and profound. The heart room, which had been a steady 54 degrees, slowly warmed to a comfortable 65. The sleeping room, with no fire of its own, rose from 54 to a pleasant 58, warmed by the gentle flow of air and the radiant heat held in the stone. The winter room remained cold, but it was a dry, still cold, a full 30 degrees warmer than the biting air outside. He had used only 4 logs. He went outside to split more wood, and the cold hit him like a physical blow. He could see the smoke pouring from the chimneys in the town below, thick and black, a sign of fires burning hot and fast just to keep the chill at bay. His own chimney released only a thin, pale wisp. He was not fighting the cold. He was coaxing the warmth. Word of the boy's comfort got back to town. Lena had asked him, and he had told her. Marcus Thorne heard the news and dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "A fluke," he said at the smithy. "The ground still has some summer warmth in it, that's all. It proves nothing. Let's see how his little fire does when it's 20 below for a month straight. Let's see how he feels when the ice starts growing on his walls." The men around him nodded in agreement. Thorne was the expert. It was a fluke. The cold snap passed, and a mild November lulled the valley into a false sense of security. The laughter at Elias's expense faded, replaced by the busy work of preparing for a normal winter. Only Old Man Hemlock remained troubled. He watched the clouds, which were a strange, greasy gray, and hung low in the sky. He watched the behavior of the deer, who were moving down from the high country in massive herds, something they only did in the face of the most severe weather. "It is not a storm that is coming," he whispered to himself, his breath fogging in the unnaturally still air. "It is a reckoning." The reckoning arrived on the last Tuesday of November. It began not with snow, but with wind. The wind came down from the northern ridges, a low moan that grew into a physical scream. It stripped the last dead leaves from the oaks in seconds. It bent the mighty pines until their tops touched the ground. Then came the snow. It was not a gentle flurry. It came horizontally, driven by the wind, as fine and sharp as sand. The sky did not darken. It turned a blinding, featureless white. The world outside the window ceased to exist. The temperature, which had been a mild 30 degrees, dropped 10 degrees in the first hour. Then 10 more. By nightfall it was 20 below zero, and the wind was gusting to 70 miles an hour. This was no ordinary blizzard. This was the winter that eats houses. Inside his cave, Elias felt almost nothing. The wind howled far above his entrance, a distant, angry god. But inside the winter room, the air was still. He had built a heavy door of thick pine planks, and it held fast. The snow began to pile up against it, not as a threat, but as a blanket. Every inch of snow that buried his entrance was another layer of insulation. He sat in the heart room by his small, steady fire. Echo was asleep at his feet, untroubled. The temperature in the room was a constant 66 degrees. He had added 2 logs to the fire since morning. He was warm. He was safe. He thought of the people in the town. He hoped their houses were strong. They were not. The houses of Hemlock's Notch were built well for normal winters. This was not a normal winter. The wind was a thief. It found every tiny crack, every uncaulked seam, and it stole the warmth. Fires that should have heated a whole house now struggled to keep a single room from freezing. Families huddled together, wrapped in every blanket they owned, feeding their stoves and fireplaces with a desperate hunger. Then the snow's weight began to tell. It was a heavy, wet snow, and it did not stop. A foot, 2 feet, 4 feet. The standard pitch of the town's roofs was not steep enough to shed such a heavy load. The first to go was the roof of the livery stable. It gave way with a great groan of tortured timber collapsing on the stalls below. Then came the barns. Marcus Thorne's own massive barn, his pride and joy, was one of them. The ridge beam, a colossal piece of hand-hewn oak, snapped with a sound like a cannon shot. The roof folded in on itself, crushing his 2 finest dairy cows and his prize bull. Inside the houses, a new terror emerged. The sheer volume of snow and ice began to block the chimneys from the top down. Smoke, thick and acrid, began to pour back into the rooms. People were forced to make an impossible choice: open a window to the deadly wind and let the smoke out, or keep it closed and choke. At the Thorne house, the largest in the valley, The wind found a weakness under the eaves of the west-facing gable. It peeled back the shingles like a tin can lid. With a shriek of tearing wood, a third of the roof was ripped away and sent cartwheeling into the white darkness. Snow poured in like water through a broken dam. The upstairs rooms were buried in minutes. Thorn, his wife, and their 2 young children retreated to the kitchen, the only room left with any integrity. They huddled around the cold iron stove, the wind now inside the house with them, a living, malevolent presence. The cold was a physical pain. It leached the strength from their bones. Thorn watched his daughter's lips turn blue. He saw the tremors in his wife's hands that she could not control. He looked at the house he had built, the house that was supposed to be a fortress, and he saw only a tomb. His pride had turned to ash in his mouth. He had been wrong, so terribly, catastrophically wrong. There was only one place to go, one person who might not be freezing. The thought was humiliating. It was unthinkable. It was their only hope. "Stay here," he said to his wife, his words barely audible over the storm. "Keep the children moving." He wrapped a thick wool scarf around his face, pulled on his heaviest coat, and plunged into the maelstrom. The journey to Elias's land was less than a mile, but it was a journey through hell. The wind knocked him down twice. The snow was up to his waist, and he had to fight for every step. He could not see more than 3 feet in front of him. He navigated by memory, by the feel of the rising ground beneath his boots. He thought he was lost a dozen times. Finally, he stumbled against the rock face of the hill. He followed it, his gloved hands scraping against the frozen stone, until he found the cave entrance, now a deep tunnel in a mountain of snow. He crawled inside, out of the wind, and saw the wooden door. There was no light visible around its edges, no sound from within. For a terrible moment, he thought the boy was already dead. He pounded on the thick planks with his fist, his blows weak and desperate. The door swung inward. Elias stood there holding a simple oil lamp. Behind him, a wave of calm, warm air washed over Thorn, a stark contrast to the screaming cold at his back. The boy looked at him. His face was calm. There was no triumph in his eyes, no, "I told you so." There was only a quiet expectation. Thorn could not speak. The words of apology, of begging, froze in his throat. He was the great Marcus Thorn. He did not beg. He unwrapped the scarf from his face, revealing the patches of white frostbite on his cheeks. He did not need words. His brokenness was plain to see. He simply pointed back into the storm, in the direction of his ruined house, his freezing family. Elias looked past him into the swirling white abyss. He nodded once. He turned, grabbed a heavy bison-hide coat from a peg, and pulled on a thick fur hat. "Wait here," he said, his voice the first sound that had passed between them. He handed the lamp to Thorn and stepped out into the storm. Thorn watched him go, swallowed by the white chaos. He stumbled into the winter room and leaned against the cold stone, the warmth from the inner room beckoning him. He was alive. He did not know how long he waited, 5 minutes, an hour. Time had lost its meaning. Then they were there. Elias emerged from the snow tunnel, half carrying Thorn's wife. Behind him came his 2 children, their faces pale with cold, but their eyes wide with wonder at the sight of the warm, safe cave. Elias settled them in the heart room, wrapping them in thick wool blankets he took from a wooden chest. He gave them mugs of a hot, sweet tea brewed from herbs. The warmth slowly returned to their bodies. The color came back to their cheeks. Thorn sat on a low stool, watching the small, efficient fire in the hearth. He looked at the smooth stone walls, warm to the touch. He felt the gentle, draft-free circulation of air. It was impossible. It was a miracle. "How?" he finally whispered, the word a surrender. Elias took a piece of charcoal from a bucket. On a large, flat flagstone that served as a low table, he began to draw. He drew the cave, the house within the cave, the crucial air gap. He drew arrows showing the flow of air, warmed by the deep earth rising in the gap, insulating the inner walls. He explained the constant 54-degree temperature of the rock. "You are all trying to fight a war against the cold," Elias said, his voice soft but clear. "You built your forts of wood and hoped they would hold. But the cold always wins that war. It always finds a way in." He pointed to the stone floor. "I did not fight. I made peace with the earth. Your enemy was the winter air at 20 below. My task was only to warm this room from 54 degrees. It takes very little fire to do that. You tried to keep the cold out. I just invited the earth's warmth to stay. The earth remembers warmth." The simple genius of it struck Marcus Thorne with the force of a physical blow. All his years of experience, all his principles, all his pride, they were built on a flawed premise. He had been building against the land, while this boy had been building with it. Over the next 2 days, as the great blizzard raged on, others came. Elias, guided by an instinct Thorne could only marvel at, ventured out and returned with more survivors. He brought Lena and her family. Their smithy roof collapsed. He brought the Reeve and his wife. He brought 9 others whose homes had failed. 17 people found refuge in the 3 small rooms. It was crowded, but it was warm. It was life. When the storm finally broke on the 3rd day, the world was remade. A pristine, silent landscape of white lay under a brilliant blue sky. The valley was buried under 12 feet of snow. The devastation was absolute. Of the 23 houses in Hemlock's Notch, only 7 were still habitable. The survivors emerged from the cave, blinking in the bright sun. Marcus Thorne stood before them, his face haggard but his eyes clear. He was a changed man. "I was a fool," he said, his voice ringing out in the profound silence. "I was proud, and I was wrong. We laughed at this boy, and he saved us." He turned to Elias. "He possesses a wisdom we have forgotten. We will rebuild this town, but we will not rebuild it the old way. We will rebuild it his way." And so they did. Marcus Thorne, the master builder, became the apprentice. Elias, the quiet boy, became the teacher. He did not lecture or command. He simply showed them. He took them to other hillsides, showing them how to read the rock, how to find the stable ground. He taught them the principles from his grandfather's journal. The Hemlock Notch method, they called it. They built new homes into the earth, using the planet's own warmth as their furnace. The houses were warm in the winter and cool in the summer. Their consumption of firewood dropped by more than half. Never again was a house in the valley lost to a blizzard. The knowledge spread. Settlers from other valleys came to learn. The boy who had been mocked as a fool became known as the wisest man in the mountains. The years passed. Elias married Lena, the girl with the curious eyes. They enlarged the cave home, adding new chambers, a greenhouse with a glass front that faced the winter sun. They raised 4 children there, in the quiet, steady warmth of the earth. Elias lived a long and peaceful life. He never lost his quiet nature, his humility. He became the elder everyone sought for advice, not just on building, but on living in harmony with the world, not against it. He died in his sleep one winter night at the age of 88 in the cool, dark sleeping chamber he had built with his own 2 hands so long ago. Centuries later, architects and engineers would give new names to his old knowledge. They would call it passive geothermal design, earth-sheltered construction, and thermal mass engineering. They would publish scientific papers proving the profound efficiency of the very principles written in his grandfather's journal. They would validate the wisdom that the people of Hemlock's Notch had once dismissed as folly. The cave home still stands. It is a local landmark now, a testament to a forgotten way of knowing. The stone walls are still solid. The air inside is still cool in the summer and holds a faint phantom warmth in the winter. Over the entrance, carved deep into the stone lintel, are the words put there by Marcus Thorne's own grandson, an epitaph for the boy who listened. It reads, "He listened to the earth, and it taught him how to live."